Intro. The late 19th century. Paris glows with electric lights, steam engines rumble in factories, and the world hums with anticipation for the next great marvel. In the workshops of inventors, the future feels limitless. In our history, the atomic age would not arrive until the mid-20th century. But in this timeline, it begins half a century earlier. In a modest Parisian laboratory, among the scent of chemicals and the quiet crackle of experimental instruments, a device is born, one that can draw power from the heart of uranium. Simple, cheap, and reliable, small enough to fit aboard a ship. Soon, in the dark depths of the oceans, the first nuclear submarines will glide silently beneath the waves. What happens when the weapons of the future sail into history decades ahead of their time? And how will it reshape the face of the world? Part 1, A Laboratory in Paris, 1893. It began in a cramped, dimly lit room on the Rue Cuvier, where glass flasks clinked softly and a faint metallic scent hung in the air. Marie and Pierre Curie, tirelessly experimenting with uranium salts, were chasing the strange, invisible force they called radioactivity. But in this timeline, a twist of fate and a touch of curiosity beyond their real-world work led them further. While measuring the faint heat given off by a block of purified uranium oxide, Pierre noticed something extraordinary: the warmth never faded. Day after day, the material released a steady, measurable flow of energy. With improvised graphite blocks scavenged from an electrical plant, they built a crude arrangement to slow the neutrons, unknowingly creating the first self-sustaining nuclear reaction in human history. The reaction was small, no brighter than a lantern's glow, but it was controlled. And in that fragile moment, in that unassuming laboratory, the atomic age quietly awoke, 50 years too soon. Part 2, The French Atomic Program. By the spring of 1894, the Curie's guarded experiments had drawn the attention of the French Academy of Sciences. At first, the notion of a perpetual heat source was met with skepticism. Too many inventors had promised impossible machines. But the Curies had something no charlatan could produce: repeatable results. The small uranium reactor, no larger than a steamer trunk, quietly radiated warmth for months without any sign of fuel depletion. In the industrial ministries of Paris, the implications were staggering. France had always relied on imported coal to feed its factories and naval steamships. Here, at last, was liberation from the long shadow of British coal supremacy. The government acted swiftly. Under the codename Projet Lumière, the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Marine jointly funded a research facility in Cherbourg, guarded day and night by the Garde Républicaine. Engineers and naval architects were summoned from across the country. Many had worked with steam turbines and early diesel prototypes, but what they now saw defied their expectations: a sealed metal vessel, producing constant heat with no firebox, no smokestack, and no coal bunkers. The first challenge was not generating power, the reactor did that easily, but converting its steady heat output into propulsion. Experiments with compact steam turbines began almost immediately. The French Navy's leadership grasped the military potential instantly. A warship that never needed to refuel, that could outlast and outrun any coal-fired vessel, would overturn a century of British dominance at sea. And there was another, more radical thought: if this engine could fit into a smaller hull, it could drive an undersea craft for weeks without surfacing. Meanwhile, secrecy tightened. Officially, Projet Lumière was an industrial efficiency study aimed at improving factory boilers. Unofficially, France was laying the foundation for the world's first nuclear fleet. Even the Curies were gradually eased out of the limelight, their work framed as purely academic while military engineers refined and scaled up the design. By 1898, the first generation of naval reactors was under construction. Far from the public eye, cylindrical pressure vessels were lowered into reinforced test pits along the Norman coast. Each unit was more compact and more stable than the last. In whispered corridors of the ministry, plans were drawn for something unprecedented: a submarine that could cross the Atlantic submerged, and return without taking on a single pound of coal. The race to the atomic sea had begun, and only France knew it was already winning. Part 3: Birth of the Atomic Fleet. In the summer of 1905, a veil of mist hung over the Cherbourg docks as a crowd of naval officers, engineers, and government officials gathered in hushed anticipation. Beneath a massive tarpaulin lay the product of nearly a decade of secret labor, the Submarine Lumiere, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. She was unlike any vessel before her. At 60 meters in length, her sleek steel hull carried no visible funnels or exhaust ports. Her power came from deep within, a compact uranium reactor driving a high-efficiency steam turbine, feeding silent electric motors. With no need for oxygen to burn fuel, the Lumiere could remain submerged for weeks at a time, her endurance limited only by the crew's provisions. Trials in the Bay of Biscay astonished even the most optimistic engineers. She cruised silently at speeds rivaling surface destroyers, her wake barely visible in calm seas. Her electric propulsion was eerily quiet, only the faint hum of machinery could be heard within the hull, masked completely to anyone outside. No coal dust. No smoke. No signal to enemy lookouts. For the French Navy, this was more than a technological marvel, it was a strategic weapon capable of rewriting naval warfare. In a world where coal-powered fleets had to stop regularly to refuel, a submarine that could cross oceans unseen was a nightmare for any admiral. Word of the Lumiere did not remain a complete secret for long. British intelligence agents, long aware that France was working on special naval propulsion, now scrambled to learn details. Sketches of the submarine's hull appeared in obscure shipping journals, though no one guessed her true capabilities. German naval attaches in Paris began sending increasingly urgent reports back to Berlin, warning of a revolutionary French vessel that may not require surfacing. The French response was simple: build more. Within 3 years, 2 additional nuclear submarines, Soleil and Voltaire, slid into the Atlantic. Their missions were not to attack but to patrol, shadowing foreign fleets, recording ship movements, and proving that France could appear anywhere, anytime, without warning. In 1908, during fleet exercises, a British cruiser squadron off Gibraltar reported being followed by a phantom vessel for 6 consecutive days. They never saw her, never heard her, yet she was there, unseen, until she simply vanished into the deep. The era of the coal-fired Navy was ending, and most of the world didn't even know it yet. Part 4: The Pre-War Arms Race. By 1910, rumors of France's mysterious new fleet had moved from whispered speculation to serious concern in the war rooms of Europe. Naval power had always been measured in tonnage, guns, and armor, but now there was talk of vessels that could travel underwater indefinitely, faster than any destroyer, and strike without warning. In London, the Admiralty treated these reports with growing alarm. Britain's Royal Navy still ruled the surface, but its supremacy was built on coal, and coal was a chain. Every fleet action was constrained by the range to the next fueling station. If France had truly broken that chain, then the heart of the empire, its global trade routes, was suddenly vulnerable in a way no battleship could prevent. Germany, too, took notice. Kaiser Wilhelm II saw the potential of such technology not only for commerce raiding but also for enforcing blockades against Britain itself. In the shipyards of Kiel and Wilhelmshaven, engineers began experiments with high-pressure steam plants and compact diesel-electric hybrids, desperately trying to bridge the gap. Yet without access to uranium reactor designs, their submarines remained bound to the surface by the tyranny of fuel. France, aware of the inevitability of imitation, tightened security around Projet Lumiere. Uranium mines in the French Congo and Gabon were placed under direct military control. Shipyard workers in Cherbourg and Brest signed lifelong secrecy oaths, and foreign visitors were quietly barred from key naval installations. Still, secrets have a way of leaking. By 1911, both British and German intelligence had succeeded in smuggling fragments of reactor schematics out of France. None were complete, critical components were omitted, technical tolerances altered, but they were enough to ignite an arms race. Laboratories in Portsmouth and Berlin began feverishly testing small-scale heat cells, trying to coax more power from less fuel. Meanwhile, the French Navy accelerated its own program. Not content with submarines alone, planners envisioned surface vessels, cruisers and even battleships, with nuclear propulsion. These ships could steam from Toulon to the South China Sea without a single stop, their speed and endurance unmatched. Tensions mounted. Every naval review, every fleet exercise became a shadowed contest, with observers noting the absence, or unexplained movements, of French vessels. The great powers sensed that the rules of the game were changing, but none could predict just how soon the first move would be made. The world was drifting toward war, and deep beneath the waves, silent predators waited for the signal to strike. Part 5, The First World War Under the Atomic Flag. August 1914. Across Europe, armies mobilized, cavalry charged, and railways clattered with troops. But at sea, the war would unfold in ways no admiral of the previous century could have imagined. On the very day Germany invaded Belgium, the French Navy quietly activated its nuclear fleet. 6 submarines, led by the veteran Submarine Lemire, slipped out of Cherbourg under cover of darkness. Their orders were simple: establish an unbroken blockade of the North Sea and the English Channel, and vanish into the depths. Unlike diesel or coal-powered craft, these submarines never had to surface. They could remain submerged for weeks, creeping silently into enemy shipping lanes, shadowing convoys, and striking without warning. The first blow came on August 19th, when the German armored cruiser Blücher disappeared off the coast of Heligoland. Survivors later swore no periscope had been sighted, no torpedo wake seen, only a sudden explosion beneath the hull, and then icy water flooding in. By October, the impact was devastating. German merchant shipping ground to a halt. Coal shipments from Scandinavia were cut off. The Kaiser's high seas fleet, wary of unseen hunters, rarely ventured beyond coastal waters. Every sortie became a gamble with invisible death. Britain, France's ally, found the situation both miraculous and unsettling. The Royal Navy, long the unchallenged master of the seas, now depended on a foreign fleet for its own protection. Admirals grumbled in private that the atomic undersea wall was as much a political weapon as a military one. France could decide where and when the blockade was tightest, and which routes remained open. On land, the war still bogged down into the mud of the Western Front. But at sea, the French advantage began reshaping strategy. Colonial troops and supplies moved freely across French-controlled waters. The Mediterranean became a secure artery, allowing France to reinforce its African and Middle Eastern holdings without fear of Ottoman or Austrian naval interference. By 1916, Germany was effectively strangled by the blockade. Food shortages and industrial collapse gnawed at the empire from within. U-boats, limited by their fuel, could not match the French nuclear subs in endurance or reach. The war that Europe had expected to be decided in the trenches was, in reality, being won in the silent, lightless corridors of the deep. And as the German war effort faltered, France's leaders began to ask a dangerous question: what else might their nuclear navy achieve, once the war was over? Part 6, Political Earthquake. By the spring of 1916, the outcome of the war was no longer in doubt. Germany's armies still fought with discipline and ferocity, but the industrial heart of the empire was breaking. The French nuclear blockade had severed supply lines, cut off imports of critical raw materials, and starved the war machine of fuel. Factories stood idle, cities endured rationing, and whispers of unrest began to echo through Berlin's streets. The collapse came faster than anyone anticipated. In August 1916, following the catastrophic loss of a resupply convoy in the Baltic, destroyed entirely by unseen attackers, the German High Command privately acknowledged the war was unwinnable. Peace overtures were made through neutral Switzerland, but the French government, emboldened by its unassailable naval position, demanded harsh terms. Britain, though technically a co-victor, found itself increasingly sidelined in negotiations. Without the Royal Navy's dominance to dictate terms, London was forced to watch as France shaped the post-war order. French diplomats spoke openly of a new Ligue nucléaire, a defensive alliance of nations bound together under the protection and control of France's atomic fleet. The armistice of October 1916 stunned the world. Germany ceded its overseas colonies not to Britain, but to France and its chosen partners, Belgium, Italy, and Japan. The French tricolor now flew over territories from Cameroon to the Marshall Islands. More shocking still, the treaty included a naval clause forbidding Germany and Austria-Hungary from building or operating submarines of any kind. The political map of Europe shifted overnight. Paris became the new center of power, its influence stretching across oceans. In colonial capitals, governors reported directly to the French Ministry of Marine, knowing that a single squadron of nuclear submarines could appear off their shores within days if loyalty wavered. Britain, uneasy and resentful, began covertly funding reactor research in its dominions, hoping to break France's monopoly. The United States, having entered the war only as a mediator in its final months, recognized the strategic danger of a single nation controlling such technology, and quietly began its own uranium exploration in the American West. But for the moment, France stood unmatched. The world's trade routes, its seas, and even its balance of power now flowed through the shadowy patrol lines of the nuclear fleet. And in the cafés of Paris, where victory was toasted with champagne, few paused to wonder what would happen when other nations finally caught up. Part 7: Shadow of the Atomic Future. The war's end did not bring the peace France had imagined. Victory had made the nation rich in territory, influence, and prestige, but also the sole custodian of a technology the rest of the world now craved. By the early 1920s, the French nuclear fleet was no longer a secret. Merchant ships spoke of strange encounters far from French waters, unseen shadows pacing their course for days, sudden bursts of wake where no vessel had been sighted. In colonial ports from Dakar to Saigon, the sleek hulls of nuclear submarines became a familiar and unnerving sight. France's leaders declared this a new age of stability. They argued that the presence of the atomic fleet deterred war, that no nation would dare challenge a power able to strike anywhere without warning. But abroad, the same presence was seen as intimidation, a silent gun pointed at every coastline. The technology itself began to evolve. Naval engineers, freed from the constraints of fuel storage, designed submarines capable of remaining submerged for months, equipped with underwater wireless systems and improved torpedo ranges. Some experimental models were rumored to carry launch tubes for aerial reconnaissance drones, fragile biplanes that could be assembled and deployed at sea. In 1923, the French Air Service tested a more audacious concept, an aircraft powered by a compact uranium reactor. It could, in theory, remain aloft for days, circling over distant colonies or enemy territory. The public was told these were scientific weather craft, but foreign observers knew better. Other nations scrambled to close the gap. Britain's Dominion-funded reactor projects in Canada and Australia inched forward, though success remained elusive. The United States, shielded by oceans but wary of dependence on French goodwill, poured money into uranium mining in Colorado and Wyoming. Japan, newly elevated in status after the war, sought its own share of the technology through covert engineering exchanges. With each passing year, the world's oceans felt smaller. Trade routes shifted to avoid patrol zones. Smaller navies became obsolete overnight, their fleets reduced to ceremonial escorts for merchantmen sailing under French protection. The French people celebrated their position at the pinnacle of global power. Yet in quiet corners of the Ministry of Marine, a few admirals voiced an unspoken fear that the monopoly would not last, and when another power launched its own nuclear fleet, the next war would begin not in the trenches or on the surface, but deep in the silent, unlit world beneath the waves. Epilogue. The atomic age had arrived not with the blinding flash of a bomb, but with the quiet hum of turbines deep beneath the sea. In this altered history, the world learned to fear a weapon that could not be seen, heard, or outrun, and to respect the nation that commanded it. France's early mastery of uranium had redrawn the map, rewritten alliances, and silenced navies that once roared across the oceans. But the very nature of power is to invite challenge. As the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, whispers of rival reactors emerged from shipyards in Portsmouth, Yokosuka, and Norfolk. Somewhere, in the dark, new hunters were preparing to join the silent war. Perhaps the world had been spared the horrors of trench slaughter and drawn-out stalemate. Yet the cost was a different kind of shadow, one cast beneath the waves, where unseen fleets circled endlessly, their captains knowing that a single mistake could plunge the globe into a new and unthinkable conflict. In the end, the dawn of uranium was not a sunrise, but a long, cold twilight, one in which the horizon could never again be trusted. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a world where the silent depths carried the weight of an empire's power. You've been listening to Night Chemistry, your quiet passage into strange histories and chemical wonders. Sweet dreams, and may your nights sail beneath the calm, endless waves of the uranium dawn. Good night.